Okay, there's a lot of noise around at the moment about small modular nuclear reactors, but they're not a new thing.
No. Small nuclear reactors are what we have in nuclear submarines. They are what the Americans have in their big nuclear carriers. The latest series has 2 reactors. Most of the submarines have 1 reactor. It's basically just replacing a boiler, allowing you to run a steam turbine to generate electricity or directly drive a shaft to.
Yeah, and they've been around since what, 60s?
Yeah, I mean, small by what means small. I mean, if you've seen like a nuclear submarine, it's about the size of what most people think a warship is. You know, about the size of a ferry, a nuclear submarine, and it allows them to run basically without refueling for years.
But they work. The point is that they've been around for a long time. They work. There was a commercial ship in America that ran. I think it was
The SS Savannah.
Yes.
And the Germans had one as well called the Otto Hahn.
Did they?
But most ports in the world wouldn't let them in.
Yeah, and it was
which
never
is crazy.
There was never any more. They also
No,
the
there's
Americans took a small modular reactor or small reactor, don't know if it was modular, to Antarctica.
Mm-hmm.
Not very successful. Had a lot of problems, and turned out actually maintaining a nuclear reactor in Antarctica is just it's just quite difficult.
Well, it's things because people are so nervous of them, unreasonably so. There tends to be surrounded by a lot of operational hoodoo that needs to be carried out, which is quite difficult to do in a remote area.
They're nuclear reactors.
Because they're nuclear reactors.
You've got to be a little bit careful.
But they're not nuclear bombs, they're nuclear reactors.
Yes. But the point is, okay, so there's a lot of talk about them today, but they're not necessarily new. They've been around in the Navy and a few other applications for decades. Why do we want them now?
I think because they are basically removed from the volatile world energy market. They run 24/7. It doesn't matter whether the sun's shining or the wind is blowing.
No, but I get that, but that's true of nuclear. Why do we want the small ones?
The small ones, because the problem with the big nuclear reactor is that it is big and it's like a massive project to go. Whereas small modular reactors, literally in a modular sense, you could virtually just bring them in on a container and drop them somewhere and then just connect to the generating equipment to them.
Yeah, there's a great company. One of my favorite SMR companies is called Last Energy, which does exactly that. They're containerized and they drop them in. Each reactor works for 7 years. They add another one after 7 years. They wait for one to cool down. It's a fantastic concept, and they're ready to build in the UK. They're complaining at the moment they haven't got the regulation.
Yeah.
And I think they will go ahead. Well, that's quite different. Those are 20 megawatt units, so they're really very small. The Rolls-Royce one is 600 megawatts, which isn't really small.
No, that's the size.
I mean, it's
size
one
of a normal old size power station, about half the size of Sizewell.
Yeah. The big new nuclear is 2 gigawatts. It's about a third the size, right?
Yeah.
But what I like about the concept is, I'm not entirely convinced that they're going to be that small. And you're driven in any energy technology to make it bigger. So they're not necessarily that small. Modularity maybe, but I like them because they completely smash the existing supply chains. You said the problem with nuclear in the West is it takes something between 20 and 30 years to build and they're unbelievably expensive. The Koreans do it very quickly. The Koreans in Abu Dhabi do it incredibly quickly. The Chinese can do it quickly. For some reason, we can't. And I think that's because our supply chain is ossified. You've got just this unbelievable amount of regulations, a very, very, very slow-moving supply chains. Everybody's making a ton of money. The chance with SMRs is to go at it again, come up with a fresh sheet of paper. I don't think you can change the nuclear industry.
To me, I'd go to every major grid-scale solar farm and battery farm in the UK and I'd drop an SMR there. You've already got grid connection. Just do it.
Yeah, we've talked about people being annoyed about solar panels. They might be a bit annoyed about solar panels plus nuclear.
Why?
Well, because they just sort of think they might die.
Do they avoid the hospitals every time? Because they're the biggest source of nuclear contamination potentially in everybody's environment. Did they go to see the welding company that actually has a radiation source that they use for checking pipelines?
Yes. But
all
people worry about
how the press is dealing with it. It's not the reality.
People worry about explosions. They always will. It's always been the problem with nuclear. So I don't think that's going to happen. I spoke to someone the other day who said, "Yeah, we'll put nuclear reactors in the corner of every factory." No, they won't. There'll be some, and they'll be good.
But it's only the guy with the red flag in front of the car stuff, right? if everyone else is doing it, we will do it eventually, or we will disappear into a little side channel of history. I mean, I know you're concerned about us going back to being a small foggy island off the north of France, but that's a reality if we don't keep pace with the rest of the world.
Okay, so SMRs, small modular nuclear reactors, sounds pretty complicated. They're going to be small, I guess, ish. They're going to be nuclear. They're going to be reactors.
What are they actually doing? They're replacing the coal or the oil or the gas or the wood or whatever else you want to burn in your boiler. Fundamentally, a conventional power station rotates a big alternator which generates the electricity.
Slow it all down. Right.
What?
So, power station. We're replacing a normal power station
Yes.
that's burning oil or wood or
Yes.
coal, right?
Yes.
With nuclear.
With a reactor.
And the reactor's doing what?
Making heat.
Making heat.
That's
What do you
it.
do with the heat?
That's the heat. You heat water up,
Heat water.
turns into steam.
Turns into steam.
With the steam, you drive a turbine round and round,
Okay.
and that drives a shaft. The
Yeah.
shaft drives an alternator, and an alternator is a big clump of wires that basically generates electricity.
Or known as a generator.
Yeah, but the term is an alternator because a generator could be all sorts of other different things.
Okay,
But
fine.
you make an alternator,
The
and
fun-
that
but the-
electricity comes out the end. So the only fundamental difference between a nuclear power station and a conventional power station is the fuel you use to heat up the steam.
Okay. And this new generation
Yes,
is, let's work it through. So it's nuclear. We know that.
yes,
It's small.
yes.
How small?
I think
Put
the
it in-
smallest ones are about 20 megawatts. So 20 megawatts is about the size of your local factory in terms of energy consumption, a big office block perhaps.
A big office block.
It's big, like the Ministry of Defence or something like that. It's like
Okay.
it's not in terms of the energy demand when you're talking about gigawatts, which is 1,000 times a megawatt, right? It's not a great deal of energy. It's the demand of a small town,
Okay. So
very small town.
a very
or
small
a
town.
village.
Right, fine. So so they're small.
Yep.
They're nuclear.
So, but the idea modular is that you have a lot of them, right?
Right.
Whereas with big nuclear power stations, which are hundreds of megawatts going into gigawatts, is you have one as a big hub, and you radiate out from that energy. Whereas the idea with the modular one, and that's the modular bit, is you drop them around all over the place.
Right. And they're built in factories.
Yeah, they build away from the site, and you
Yeah.
bring them to the site, bolt them down, stick the wires in. We don't quite stick the wires in, but you connect it up, and then that provides electricity. And then when you need to refuel it or you need to do anything to it again, you unbolt it, you put it on the back of a lorry, and you take it away, and you stick another one in.
So instead of like this huge construction project like
Yes.
the big nukes, which are on site, now
Yeah.
it's got to be built from scratch and everything else, you've got a production line
Yep.
producing them, take them to site, put them down, and you can put them kind of everywhere.
And it's like the same sort of concept as a porta cabin. Like you make the thing, you make your porta cabin somewhere else, you bring it to site, you drop it in, all of a sudden you've got an office. Well, with this, you make your nuclear reactor somewhere else on a production line, carefully controlled, completely sealed unit. It goes to site, you put it in, you plumb it in, boom, done.
And then you've got a load of nuclear bombs around the country.
Very difficult to turn them into nuclear bombs. It would take an awful lot more science and engineering to make them go bang. They're quite difficult to make go bang. The very small chance of anything going wrong would involve it melting down, which would, like Fukushima, would release nuclear contamination into the air and the water. But it's really, really difficult to make that happen. You have to be sensible enough to have building a power station on a fault line in the most volcanic area on the planet, and then you have a cooling water system that breaks, and an emergency cooling water system that also breaks if it gets flooded, because you've actually built this on a tectonic plate on the side of an
Yeah,
island
that's
with a water
Fukushima. Or you have
Yeah.
Russia, Chernobyl, where people just do endless things wrong. I'm a great fan of nuclear, but my God, getting planning for those things is going to be...
Yes, and that's the issue. And I think with the difference between us building nuclear power in the West and where nuclear power is proliferating in the rest of the world is they don't have to go through 27 public inquiries.
Well,
to
there's
get
an
nuclear
interesting
power
thing. So
stations.
some of the small nuclear reactors, anything under 50 megawatts,
Yep. Don't even
isn't
need-
national planning. No,
Yeah.
but you've got a local planning. But
Yeah.
how do you go to your local council and go, I want to build a nuclear reactor? I mean,
Yeah.
how can a planner deal with that? They're used to dealing with like 15 houses in a village. But it's a skills problem. Who's going to give permission? I think that's one of the problems at the moment.
Yeah. So I think for something like SMR to work, it needs to be dealt with under regulation, under a strategic initiative. In that the strategic initiative, we will take all of these 20, 30, 40, 50 megawatt reactors and we will place them strategically around the UK. And the sensible thing to do would be, in my opinion, is to stick them next to renewables that don't operate all the time. So you've got a grid connection.